Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the JMO Podcast. I'm your host, Tayler Michels, and we have regular guest Jason Mitchell back on the show this week. We're talking detailed fall walleye tactics for across the Midwest. Make sure to visit our Facebook and Instagram pages at Jason Mitchell Outdoors to recommend a guest or a topic for an upcoming episode of the JMO Podcast.
Hello?
Jason, man.
Hey, how's it going?
Good, man. Good. How about you? Where are you at?
Good. I'm at the shop.
Well, perfect, man. Well, we got a lot of ground to cover and not a lot of time to do it in, so I just want to jump right in here. Coming into this time of year, I mean, what are some of the most common things coming across your deck? I mean, just some trendy topics, some things that you want to cover that, questions that you're answering all the time. Maybe we can just start off with something like that.
Yeah, the probably the biggest thing with walleye fishing in particular is, in order to catch them, you have to find them, right? I mean, once you find fish, catching them is a lot of times pretty simple or pretty straightforward. And, I tell you what, in the fall, well, just to back up a little bit, when you first enter the fall, and you get, kind of late summer, early fall, and, obviously the water starts to cool, and then obviously the water cools to the point where the lake turns over in a lot of cases. But, what I find is that the really good fall walleye patterns seem to set up the best when you have consecutive cool days where you have the water temperature dropping each day. Okay. And as the water temperature drops each day, a lot of these classic patterns emerge, whether it's a deep, sharp breaking structure, fish are river channel on a reservoir, the deep rock structure on a natural lake. A lot of these classic patterns really start to set up with these consecutive cool days. And then obviously you get in some lakes in northern Minnesota, for example, where you've got whitefish species, whether it's tullibees, ciscos, those fish spawn in the fall, and that'll bring in a lot of big fish, in particular when these fish move up to spawn over shallow rock. And so you've got these patterns that emerge when the water cools down. I mean, that's what happens in the fall. And it seems like the later you get, the colder you get, and the more miserable it is to be out in a boat, it seems like a lot of this fishing gets better and better and easier as the fall progresses. But what can really throw a wrench into fall walleye fishing is if that reverses. Okay, it's the same thing like in the spring, you want the water warming up every day, and as the water warms up, the fishing gets better and easier. Well, in the springtime, if you have a big front that comes through and the water cools back down, that shuts the fishing down and makes it tough. In the fall, it's the exact opposite. Okay, where if you have a warm trend or a warm spell, like say middle of October, you've got a bunch of 70, 75 degree days and the water temperature actually starts to climb back up, it just throws everything into disarray. Where the pattern is, there is no pattern. And so, a lot of times when you talk fall walleye fishing, you got to kind of look at the trend that you're in, the 10,000 foot view, the big picture, and kind of see where you're at in the fall that way, as far as, are we cooling down, or is there things that are happening where it's actually, warming back up? And so with classic fall patterns, when you do see that cool down, every lake sets up different, obviously, and even every year sets up a little different. But, typically when you have that cool down every day, that kicks these patterns into gear. But a lot of the patterns, it almost becomes deja vu, where a lot of the little intricacies of fishing, you start to see some of the things that also happen in the springtime. For example, say you have these cool nights where you've got frost in the boat in the morning, and you go out and the mornings are really cold, where it's like, boy, I wish I would have brought my gloves, kind of stuff. And then the water warms up a few degrees during the middle of the day. When the sun comes out in the afternoon, the water bumps up a few degrees. And a lot of times, what we find in the fall is that, middle of the day, into the afternoon, it seems like that fishing just keeps getting better and better as the day progresses. It's just like, same type of stuff you see in the spring. But I tell you what, if there's one thing across the board that I always try to look for, and it's not always possible to find, but if you can find current in the fall, usually you're going to find walleyes. It could be a feeder creek dumping into a lake. It could be a causeway that divides two lakes and there's water moving back and forth. Even, fish that are pushing up into rivers or some of the major tributaries, in reservoirs. It could be even wind driven, where you've got, some island complexes. You've got current coming through between a slot or a gap between two islands. But it just seems like current in the fall is where it's at. I mean, you can't go wrong. Even on Devil's Lake, I mean, typically, we have current coming into the lake in the spring when the snow thaws out and, the runoff is coming in. And then in the summertime, typically, we don't get a lot of precipitation as a rule of thumb, and the lake actually maybe might drop a little bit. But if you get like a big rain in the fall where there's water coming in, the ditches are running, you look around some of the bridges and some of those bottlenecked areas where there's current, and you're going to find walleyes. And I think the reasons can vary. I mean, a lot of lakes, it's really driven by shiners. Like I remember as a kid, people talked about, walleyes moving into the rivers in the fall, like it was a mock spawning, or like the fish are practicing, where that's where they're going to go in the spring. So they're going to run up in the fall, it's called a mock spawning run. And I'm talking, what we knew about walleye fishing, 25, 30 years ago. And, I think the consensus now is that shiners really pull up in the river and into currents in the fall. A lot of shiners, whether it's spot-tail shiners, golden shiners, they're going to winter. They're going to pull out of these lakes and pull out of these reservoirs, and they're going to winter in these current areas. And that pulls in the bait fish. And so even like on places like Lake Winnipeg, fish moving into the Red River, fish moving into the Winnipeg River in the fall, there's definitely a degree threshold where it seems like, it gets 50 degrees, and that's when it's supposed to happen. If it's warmer than 50 degrees, those shiners just aren't up in the river yet. And as a result, the predators aren't there either yet. And so some of this stuff is really driven by shiners, but not all of it. Even on Devil's Lake, I mean, we don't have any shiners, but tell you what, in the fall, a lot of fish get caught. But a lot of these spots aren't necessarily a secret by any means. But I tell you what, come fall, you can catch a lot of fish in those current areas, and so it doesn't matter if it's a bridge causeway like we're dealing with on Devil's Lake, or maybe an incoming culvert, or something up in say Pelican Lake on Devil's Lake where you've got water coming in, or see it in northern Minnesota lakes where you've got these islands and there's current coming through. A lot of that's driven by wind, but for a variety of reasons, it just seems like current really attracts walleyes in the fall when you can find it.
Let's do a little deep dive into those current type spots. What's happening under the water? I mean, is it attracting fish? Is there, a bigger region of the lake? The walleyes are coming to that. They know where it's at, and it's that time of year. The clock in their head switches off. Or is it more so just those spots just, those fish become active, the fish that are already there? I mean, kind of what do you think's happening under the surface there besides just, maybe just to sort of translate into a day of fishing, like how you're going to get in there and catch them?
Well, I don't know all the answers. I don't know all the time why fish are doing what they do. You just find them in a spot, and then you try to create a backstory and try to figure out after the fact. I obviously, we talked about the shiner migration, where bait fish are coming in shallow, or sometimes it might be ciscos or tullibees that are relating to current. Sometimes you have to be an opportunist where, it's going to be wind driven, and you're going to have wind that blows 30 miles an hour out of one direction. And then, it blows for 4 or 5 days, and then you've got current, or water getting stacked up on one side of the lake, and the wind quits and that water comes back, and it forces itself and creates a current through narrow areas. A lot of times it's, between an island and a point, or, something that funnels that movement of water. And so there's a lot of different reasons why, these fish will do what they do. And, the reality is, I don't know if anybody can honestly say if they know the reasons why all the time. It's just that, and to be fair, current will attract fish any time of the year. Spring, summer, or fall, but it just seems like it becomes magnified in the fall. It seems like in the fall, maybe there's not as much current. Maybe, obviously, you don't have, the rivers aren't flowing as strong, the tributaries aren't running as hard. And it just seems like when you do find current in the fall, there's just something about it that just seems to hold and attract walleyes. And it doesn't matter where you go, anywhere I've ever walleye fished, it seems like if there's current, it could be even just a little feeder creek dumping into a small natural lake, whatever it is. But it just seems like the bait fish really move into that in the fall, and the walleyes are there too.
And, you talked a little bit about coming into these fall patterns being like deep structure, deep, sharp breaking structure, and also with the contrasting current that could bring some fish shallow. Talk a little bit about the decision-making process for both of them. I mean, what kind of days, if you're going through some of your deeper structure spots and maybe it's a tough day, like you said, you get that Indian summer and all of a sudden the fish spray out, and talk through a day of tough fall fishing and some of your decision-making process to try to really grind out some fish.
Well, it can vary. I mean, obviously, if I've been on the water every day on a particular body of water where I kind of get a feel for what's happening, I might, there's a big difference in how you fish. If you're trying to find the mother lode, if you're trying to find a lot of fish in one spot and you know that exists somewhere, or if you just know that the fish are scattered and you're going to find a few here and a few there, how you approach your day is going to be completely different. And so a lot of times, when you do have those warm trends in the fall, the pattern is there is no pattern. You're just trying to hit as many good spots as you can and fish them efficiently and quickly. And a lot of times, we do a lot of trolling in the fall where we're just trying to troll big spots and just try to cover as much water as we can, comb through as much water as we can, and try to put your bait in front of as many fish as you can, during the day. But, you get later on in the year when these cooler temps kick in, that the fish get more concentrated and those patterns start to get more, you just get more solid fall patterns. Well, then you're going to, if you're not finding fish, you're going to keep looking until you find that big school. And, obviously fishing at the end of the day is nothing more than the process of elimination. I mean, you can have all kinds of ideas and, talk is cheap, right? I mean, you can come up with all kinds of theories and reasons and stuff before you ever get on the water. Then you get on the water and all your theories and reasons are wrong. And so, you start out doing what you think is going to work or what you've maybe had some success with in the past. And, maybe you start out looking over some of the deeper structure, and beauty of that is you can trust your electronics. If the fish are there, you're going to see them on your depth finder. And if that isn't happening, or if it isn't happening well, then, you can slide up and check out some of the current locations or look for current, and check out some of that. And, obviously, you can't go wrong with rock structure in the fall, when that can be shallow or deep. And then the other thing that I really like in the fall, which will kind of carry you to a certain point in the fall, is if you can find green weeds. If you can find green weeds that are still green in the fall, those will really be a magnet for fish. And I think, too, that the fall, I think some of these weeds, these weed beds, I think they hold heat. I think that those fish just, if you can find good green weed growth, at least into September, maybe even the very first part of October, before it gets brown and down and breaks down, some of that will really hold fish. And so sometimes when things get kind of tough, early fall or during those warming trends, a lot of times I'll focus on weeds. It seems like the weeds have saved my tail a lot, especially, as a guide on Devil's Lake, when things were kind of helter-skelter and there's fish shallow, fish deep, and you didn't know where to fish. Green weeds seemed to, I was able to scratch out a lot of good days. And then, as weeds break down and die, focus on that good rock structure. And, on Devil's Lake, it's not like we have rocks everywhere. You say rock structure in a northern Minnesota lake where half the lake is rock. Most of the islands are one big rock. Obviously, that doesn't mean as much because there's rocks everywhere. But you take a place like Devil's Lake, and I would say, 90% of the bottom is soft. Those rock piles, kind of stick out a little more. There's not as much of it. And those, those types of lakes, the rock really holds fish.
Okay, I like that. Fall fishing specifically, does your decision-making process or your mentality or strategy change at all in terms of, being out there and fishing and grinding a spot? Do you have less patience because you know what you're looking for and you are trying to find that mother lode? Translating that into a day of fishing, what's it like in the boat for you in the fall? I mean, are you just setting your expectation before you even get out on the water?
Well, for the most part, I would say that, and this is just me, but I don't have patience. Okay. And as a guide, a lot of times the customers didn't have patience either. And so typically, I like to move around and look for fish. And, what I find is you can catch a few here and a few there, and, hopefully they add up over the course of the day. Where that strategy can really change or probably has to change is, say, if you're trying to target some big fish, okay, where, like, say if you're fishing in a tournament, you're weighing 5 fish, realistically, if everything goes great, you only need 5 bites. Realistically, you're not going to land every fish, so maybe you shoot for 8 bites, well, maybe that's 3 bites during an hour window in the morning and one bite during the middle of the day when nothing's happening. Then you get one more window where you get two bites, and there you go. And you're on a good spot where you know there's big fish, and you're just waiting out for those fish to move. You're waiting out for those key windows or those movements, and you want to be there when it happens. And so, that's a different strategy than I think what the average person does when they're just going out fishing. They just want to go out and catch fish. I remember as a guide, I mean, people always say, yeah, I want to catch big fish. Well, yeah, don't we all? And they say, yeah, we want to catch a lot of them. I'm like, yeah, me too. But, the reality is that, as a guide, a lot of times we were just going out trying to catch, good eaters, just, a good day of fishery, you catch, say, 10 to 30 fish, that are over 15 inches. I mean, that's a great day of fishing. And, obviously your strategy is going to be a lot different for just going out and just catching fish, and so, yeah, I mean, there's times where, you can, if there's fish in a spot, you can grind on them, as, people like to say. But the reality is that, I don't think you can go wrong when you're just out fishing every day, just to try to sample as much water as you can, especially if you're going to be fishing multiple days, because that's the only way to find fish. Probably the toughest or the worst thing about grinding on a spot is that, yeah, if you only fish one or two spots in a day and it doesn't work out and it doesn't end up being the day that you're hoping for, you're back to square one the next day because you've got nothing to go on. And so it's always nice to, dabble in as many as you can, so that way when you just establish a milk run where you got a few fish going here and a few fish over there, and you can just jump from spot to spot. And like a lot of times when I was guiding every day and I was on the water every day, I'd spend a lot of time in spots where I knew there were fish, but I always tried to spend a percentage of the day looking, as a percentage of the day checking new spots or spots I hadn't fished at least in a while, just to try to, I guess, reinforce my milk run. The more spots I could find that had fish, the better, because, obviously when you fish on a spot, you pull fish off a spot, spot doesn't get better when fish get removed off the spot, and so a lot of times, spot's only good for so long, and either things change or boats pile up on a spot and the spot gets beat up. And so it's probably a little bit of both. You want to you obviously want to keep your line in the water where there's fish, but you also want to spend a good part of the day looking for fish. So.
And, what would be your 1-2 punch in terms of methods? I mean, if you had to pick one primary method of fishing that you're going to do in the fall, if you're going to put days in on the fall in your home body of water of Devil's Lake, what are you going to spend the most time doing? And, maybe what would be your number 2 method and why?
Well, I don't think you can go wrong with a jig, right? Either a jig and minnow or a jig and soft plastic, even a jig and a half crawler, or, if you can still find leeches in the fall, they work great. It's really hard to find good leeches. But a jig is pretty tough to beat. You can cast it, you can fish it below the boat, pretty versatile. And that's pretty much all year long. I mean, I like to use jigs a lot. One of my favorite ways to catch a fish. Last few years, I would say the last 5 years, obviously the horizontal swim baits, the snap jigging with either jigging wraps or rail shads. There's a lot of baits out there now. We got Tika minnows and even some of the ripping wraps, as far as more of a horizontal bait that you don't need to tip with anything, and it's just a really aggressive jig stroke. Those can work exceptionally well in the fall. I don't know what it is, but there's times where you can be just struggling and, mark fish that they don't hit or they're biting really lethargically, and you drop that down and snap it a few times and you get a bite that's so hard. It's like, wow, where did this come from? I haven't had a bite like this hard in 2 weeks. It's like the fish respond to your presentation. If you fish really, subtly and passively, that's the type of bites you get. You fish really aggressively, the fish bite aggressively, and so sometimes just like switching a light switch on. But, I like to jig a lot. And obviously for rock structure, especially with those guiding, I like you running, heavy bottom balls. There's just a plain snell or sometimes a spinner, but just because it's just easy, you drop it down 45-degree angle and you just go along, and bottom balls, there's a ticking along the rocks. And if somebody does have, good feel for the bottom, especially kids and stuff, bottom balls are just an easy way to, anybody can catch fish. But, we also throw a lot of crankbaits, either big baits on fire line behind the boat or, run a lot of lead core. And so, the big spots, a lot of times can set up really well for trolling. And that's the other thing I'd touch on in the fall is that a lot of times, big good spots become community spots, right? Because everybody knows about them. These big prominent structural pieces on a map that have names that everybody knows about. Those are good spots, but the rest of the year, it gets to be quite a few boats on them. You get in the fall, and kids go back into school. The weather gets a little gnarly, and there's hardly anybody out in the water anymore. Don't overlook your primary community spots, because a lot of times those are some of your best fall spots. Just for whatever reason, in the fall, those fish just seem to transition. They're moving a lot. And those big, prominent pieces of structure end up holding a lot of fish. And when there's not many people on a community spot, that's what some of the best real estate on an entire lake on a lot of different fisheries that we go to.
The JMO Podcast is sponsored by Long Haul Trucking. Long Haul's always looking for more skilled professional CDL drivers to join their team. They're a people-first company, and it shows. Their employee-owned, asset-based fleet of over 350 Conestogas is among industry leaders in pay and benefits geared towards long-term success and growth for company drivers and owner-operators. If you're a professional driver or a company that wants to ship product with the best in the business, get a hold of Long Haul at 1-800-255-5153 or find them online at longhaultrucking.com. Long Haul, running on the power of promises kept. I hear it all the time from guys that, fall fishing, one of their biggest reasons why they love it so much is because everybody does. They put the boat away and they go back to their jobs. The kids go back to school. Hunters are out hunting and the fishermen get the lake to themselves. What do you love so much about fall fishing?
Just everything you just said, I remember, for many, many years, I guided waterfowl hunting pretty hard. And so I would fish really hard right up until the end of September, and then I'd be done. I'd be guiding duck or goose hunters every day. And so like in October, there were quite a few years, right? I hardly got to do any fishing in the fall and missed it, and now that we're doing television, I'm not guiding anymore. I spend a lot of time fishing in October, and I tell you what, it is fun. There's more and more people fishing in the fall all the time. There's definitely more than what there was, say, 10 years ago. But yeah, you go out there and the leaves are turning. Just a great time to be alive. And you get these nice days where you can still wear a sweatshirt and good fishing, and your days are limited. There's just something magical about it. And, when you combine good fishing with you're out there by yourself, it's just a neat time of the year.
Looking at this fall specifically, what do you got planned? Where do you think you're going to spend most of your time?
I'm going to be like a tumbleweed, blow with the wind. I hope to really get up to the Rainy River this fall and do that. Obviously we didn't get to fish it this spring. And I'm hoping to get down to I'm hoping to get out to Lake Sakakawea. I'm hoping to do some stuff on the Lake Oahe as well. And then obviously Devil's Lake close to home. I'll be doing a lot of fishing here. And, we'll fish right up until the end till we can't get a boat in the water. And, that's the other thing too. I remember when I was a kid growing up, I don't know if it's just me or the neighborhood I lived in or whatever, but, none of us had nice heated shops to put a boat into. And so we'd have our boats in the backyard covered in a blue tarp. And it was really an effort to get them out in the spring. And you didn't dare. There was a certain point where you didn't dare fish anymore in the fall, and everybody had to winterize their boats. That was a thing. And now you just back it into a garage and you're ready to go, so you can push it a lot more. And I think there's a lot more people that that have that, and so you see people fishing right up until the end. You see people fishing later, and the equipment's more dependable too. It's back in the day, pull starting a 2-stroke, and I still miss the smell of that oil and smoke, but now it's just people are pushing it and they're fishing a lot later into the year, and that's what I find is that the later it is, the more brutal, the more uncomfortable it is, the colder it is. I feel like that's when the best fishing is. The best fishing isn't in necessarily early September when it's really nice to be out there and you're still wearing a sweatshirt and no gloves. The best fishing is often when you're wearing your ice fishing clothing and you're bundled up and you've got a life jacket and your gloves on, and you're just 4 or 5 hours and you can hardly take it, and so that's when some of the best fishing of the year is, when those cold, gnarly, some of the last days that you can get out there. It's pretty special time.
Any more tips and tricks for fall fishing that you just got on your mind?
Well, there's kind of an old adage with fall fishing that use bigger baits, okay, where I guess one of the theories that gets thrown around with anglers is that, there's not as many bait fish in the fall. The numbers have been cropped down. The bait fish have also had a season to grow. And so your perch are bigger, your smelt are bigger, your ciscos, whatever it is, they're bigger and there's fewer of them. And then there's also the speculation. None of us have a walleye brain, so we can only speculate, right? But the other thing is that, the other thing you hear is that, fish want maximum energy return, on investment, where they want to do the least amount possible to eat the most possible, and so they target the bigger bait fish. I don't know all the reasons, right? We can make up all these theories, and again, there's times where, downsizing the fall is what the fish want. I mean, you just have to, again, we go back to the process of elimination. If something's not working, you try something else. But as a rule of thumb, you can't go wrong using bigger baits, bigger profiles. And I've seen that over and over, especially with crankbaits. I mean, it just, those fish want that bigger bait. And it could be, running a bigger bait, like say like a free diver or a reef runner in 15 feet of water right behind the boat versus running a really small bait with lead core. Those fish just want that bigger bait. And that goes with your live bait and stuff too. If you have access to chubs, chubs are definitely can be a great way to catch fish in the fall on a lot of different bodies of water. But even if you don't have that, even like when you're using a jig and a minnow, use a jig, upsize your jig, put a soft plastic trailer on, and then tip your minnow on. Or sometimes I'll put 2 minnows on a jig. A lot of times when I'm running harnesses, I'll put 2 leeches on a spinner harness, like on a crawler harness, and just try to upsize that profile and create a bigger profile with what I'm doing. It seems like, as a general thumb, it just seems like I have better success with that in the fall. Not always, never say always or never with fishing, but as a general thumb, upsize your profile, use a little bit bigger baits. Don't be afraid to go on the large end of the spectrum, with lures, whatever you're doing. Other than that, just, be safe. Obviously, you got to dress for success. You got to, have some base layers, have the clothing that you need to last. Gloves become important. I mean, you're basically dressing like you're going on a snowmobiling trip or an ice fishing trip a lot of times when you get into November and sometimes even December, depending on the body of water. I mean, I have a lot of good memories from fall fishing, especially late, tough conditions, and where it's brutal to be out there. I remember an episode we filmed on the Winnipeg River a few years ago. Just had a ball. Went up there, and I think it was early November. We were probably the last people fishing up there that year. I remember we could hardly get up the boat ramp, where you load your boat or unload your boat off the trailer, and you drive your trailer up the ramp, and then the water runs off your trailer and freezes to the ramp. And then after a couple of people, I mean, it gets to the point where you can hardly even get up the ramp, because of the ice, And I remember one time on Devil's Lake, this was years ago, I backed my boat in the water and I fished all day. I came back and there was a couple other people that must have used the ramp while I was gone, and there was ice on the ramp, and I backed my boat or my trailer and pickup down the ramp. And this is back when we had hubs on our 4-wheel drive pickups. So it tells you how many years ago it was. But I got down to the bottom of the ramp and I couldn't get back up the ramp, and I couldn't get out of the pickup because every time I put my foot off the brake to put the emergency brake or whatever, I kept sliding backwards. And so finally, I mean, the emergency brake wouldn't hold, and I just had to stand on the regular brake. And now, I mean, my front doors are, almost to the water. I mean, my pickup's a long ways in the water, and I can't get up. I can't get out of the pickup to turn the hubs to get my 4-wheel drive engaged. And I'm on a boat ramp in the fall where I didn't know if anybody was going to come by there that day. I was over at the Lakewood ramp over on Devil's Lake, and finally, for whatever reason, somebody just drove up to the ramp. I think they were just out looking around and sightseeing and checking things out. And gentleman drives up to the ramp, and I'm waving my arms out my window, for him to come down. And so then he came down. I told him, hey, can you turn my hubs for me? And he turned my hubs, and I put it in 4-wheel drive, and I was able to crawl out. But so, you get late in the year, bring some sand. A lot of people just bring a sandbag, bring some sand to put on the ice, and sink that through. But yeah, I mean, that's how cold and miserable it can be. I mean, it is cold when you're out on a lake and you're out there all day long in the elements. Every piece of clothing you can get. I mean, you're just chilled to the bone. I mean, you're just, when you get home at night and you're in bed, I mean, it takes all night just to warm up, and, it can be brutal conditions that way, but talk about phenomenal fishing at times, especially in some of these rivers. Rainy River, Winnipeg River, even the Missouri River. Just some really good memories of just catching big fish. So the best days I've ever had in my life have been in the fall, late in the fall. Just hardly stand to be out there, but just good stuff.
Is everybody just pushing it to the edge, going, trying to get there to the last day of fall, just because, is that the best time to go? I mean, is every day that goes by, do you feel like fall gets better and better, or are these fall patterns happening early and we're just so addicted to it, everyone just keeps going?
Well, I don't know, probably a little bit of both. Obviously it gets to the point where, all good things come to an end, but it just seems like in my mind, some of the best stuff is late, when that water temperature is starting to really cool down and you're getting close to freeze up. It just, especially some of these current patterns that we talked about, when these shiners are moving up into some of these river systems or some of these current areas, it just seems like that's when you really get your big fish. But, in other places too, the fish will concentrate. They'll do certain things where you just have a lot of fish in a small area doing the same thing. That just creates a good environment to fish, and so probably all of the above. I don't have all the answers, but it's in, and the other thing is, obviously I like the change of seasons. I mean, I look forward to ice fishing. I'm already thinking about that, and I love hunting, and I love, again, after fishing all winter on the ice, I can't wait to get a boat in the water. But, part of me is, in the back of my mind, I'm thinking, wow, it's going to be a long time before I get back in a boat. And so you want to make the most of it and, go out with a bang. So.
Yeah, man. I mean, you talking about that. I know you're into a lot of stuff. Fall, it just seems like it's that time for any outdoorsman across the board. How do you find balance? I mean, what is your secret, if there is one, to finding balance in your schedule and scheduling in some of this fall fishing?
I don't know. That's my problem is I've never had balance. I mean, yeah, I guess you get good at telling white lies, right?
Yeah.
I'm lucky because I don't have a day job, right? I mean, the outdoors is what I do, but even with that, I mean, it's hard. I mean, you have pheasant hunting, you've got waterfowl hunting. I love to bow hunt, deer hunting. I mean, there's all these different things going on. And then if you start going to other states, I mean, it just never ends. I mean, it's just a deal. You just try to, burn the candle at both ends. And, you try to pick and choose your battles. I mean, yeah, you never get enough of it. I mean, there's never enough days. I wish October was even November. I wish those 2 months were half a year because there's just so much to do. And that's probably what makes the fishing so good is there are so many things to do. And so it takes people off the water. It takes people off these spots. That's probably part of the magic to do it is that there are a lot of people pheasant hunting and doing all these different things. And, that's probably why we all love this time of year. I mean, if you love to hunt and fish, I mean, you just live for the fall. I mean, it's just the best that it gets, just so many great things to do. And I guess it's good that not everybody's doing the same thing. Otherwise it wouldn't be so fun. But, yeah, I mean, there's never enough hours. Never enough days.
One thing that just popped into my head here, we were talking earlier about, finding spots and methods. I mean, is there any opportunity maybe even for like a night bite? And maybe where I'm going with that is, what's your idea in terms of the bite that, in the fall, are the fish just chomping all day long or, or what are some of the bite windows? What's that conversation like?
Well, I'm glad you brought it up because I didn't even think of it before, but you get these full moon periods and it seems like as you get in the fall, every full moon period gets better and better and better, and that was a thing that we, years ago when you could fish on Mille Lacs, after dark, we'd go out on Mille Lacs in the fall and pull shallow running stick baits and just catch really nice fish. And you can do it on Leech Lake. I haven't had success on Devil's Lake. I don't know, not to say that you couldn't do it, but I just haven't, had any success with it. But even, Lake Sakakawea, Garrison Tail Race. I mean, there's a lot of places where if you have, good water visibility, you can catch big fish, especially during those full moon periods. And I honestly believe that during that full moon period, the fishing can be tougher during the day, but it really goes at night, and then the rest of the month when you don't have full moon or, overcast skies at light at night, you have usually on most bodies of water, you have no problem catching fish during the day. But yeah, that after dark trolling is a that's a good deal. And it typically every as you get later in the fall, September's good, October's better, and November's better yet as a rule of thumb. So.
And is there any nuance to that in your mind? I mean, what is that? I mean, is it kind of probably not something you can go out and just do if you show up somewhere at a lake after dark? It's kind of a deal where you're mapping out your spots during the day. I mean, what's some of the nuance behind capturing some of these bites like an after dark bite?
Well, I mean, you don't necessarily have to scope it out during the day. I mean, especially with map chips, some of the more well-known reefs and things like that. But, it's just kind of a deal, the old KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. I mean, you just stick to the basics. You don't worry about running multiple rods necessarily. A lot of times running our baits high, you don't have to worry about getting real close to the bottom. If you're in 8 feet of water, 9 feet of water, run them halfway down, the fish will come up for it. And a lot of times I'm just running big baits. And there's people that have done a lot more. I've done some of that, but there's people that have done a lot more than I have, but big baits, say a size 7 or longer. And again, in the fall, we can get away with running, bigger baits. I remember even, casting after dark. Well, I remember many years when I was a kid growing up, we used to go down to the embankment on Lake Sakakawea between Lake Sakakawea and Lake Audubon, where they would pump water out of Lake Audubon in the fall back into Sakakawea through a culvert. And we'd go down there and fish all night from the rocks from shore and catch huge walleyes. And that's just, standing there and casting and reeling. And some nights are obviously better than others, but, just use some rattle traps or rattle baits too back then. But, just these big, long stick baits that, run down 2, 3, maybe 4 feet maximum on a cast, and even, you're using those same baits when you're trolling and don't necessarily have to let out very much line. There's places where you can use planer boards and put lights on your, light sticks on your planer boards to spread out lines, especially on like some of the Great Lakes stuff where you're just bigger spots, bigger water. But yeah, I mean, just in a lot of times we're going a lot slower. You can go a mile and a half an hour with those baits after dark, late in the fall, and catch fish. But that's the way that, personally, where I've caught some really big fish, is that trolling those stick baits after, like it might be a Salmo Sting, Rapala, Husky Jerk, or original Rapala. Smithwick Rattle and Rogues are kind of an old classic. And it seems like, a lot of times we're either using just a classic pearl or silver with a black back, or gold with a black back, or like a bronze color, or just going dark, like just predominantly dark, like a purple, black, something purple descent, something along those lines. But yeah, I mean, just keep it simple. Run your baits high and go slow. And yeah, when you get hit, you'll know it. So.
How about other species? We spend a lot of time talking about walleyes. I mean, just about everything's hungry in the fall. Do you ever look forward to any other bites besides walleyes in the fall?
Well, we've got on some really good smallmouth and largemouth bites, especially over deep rocks. We've gotten on some good musky bites, and obviously, you've got the, some of the fall stream fishing that kicks in, like in Wisconsin, with the king salmon and brown trout. But yeah, I mean, there's just a lot of good stuff going on. Even panfish, bluegills and crappies. The crappies will kind of stack up, over their wintering holes, as you get later into the fall. So yeah, I mean, it's a good time of the year truly to fish for everything. I spend probably most of my time walleye fishing, but I love to fish for everything. And yeah, it's a good time of the year, regardless of where you live and what you fish for, in my mind.
And, the reason I ask that is, is the fall, when everything is kind of setting up in those spots. I mean, is there any overlap? Do you ever have any memories or stories of, going to some of these lakes and getting on a good walleye bite, but every other cast is a big smallmouth, or you mix a big pike in or a big muskie in? I mean, are there any real good multi-species bites you might look forward to in the fall altogether?
Yeah, I mean, we stumble into some pretty neat things just because the fishing's so good. I remember, being up in places like Kabetogama Lake in northern Minnesota, or Rainy Lake, where, you just, on one part of the reef, it's just nothing but walleyes, and it's really good walleyes, and they're big walleyes, and then you slide up or down, and you're literally a cast away from just what feels like the biggest smallmouth school you've ever seen. We're just, for 45 minutes is pretty much a fish every cast. I mean, you see some really crazy stuff. I remember a couple years ago, and I was in North Dakota, and I was just I was on this prominent rocky point on this lake, and it was a small lake. And I put my talon down, and I probably caught, and I'm not exaggerating, because it was a fish every cast for. I mean, I was to the point where you're just tired of catching fish, but I probably caught at least 40 largemouths, and some of them were really nice. And then I caught a few smallmouths. I caught some walleyes. I caught a muskie. I caught a big pike. I mean, it was just craziness, And one of the best days of fishing of my life. And yeah, I was tailing down in the same spot. I mean, just think of how it must look below the boat, how concentrated the fish were. To experience that type of fishing, it must have been just tail to tail fish. And so yeah, I mean, obviously you can have tough days any time of the year. You can have tough weather, tough conditions. I mean, there's a lot of reasons why you don't catch fish, but yeah, I mean, some of the best days of fishing in my entire life have been in the fall, particularly late in the fall, when it starts to get cold.
That's such an awesome story, and realistically, there's absolutely no chance of that on the 4th of July, probably.
No, not like that, especially with the size of fish. I mean, these are all big fish too, I mean, I've had days where we've caught 5, 6, 7 fish, walleyes, that were over 8 pounds in a day, and it just seems like you see that type of craziness more in the fall than some other times of the year. It just those fish just get bunched up, and the bigger fish are biting, where sometimes of the year just seems like it's really hard to find those big fish, or they're sporadic, one here, one there, where in the fall you see some pretty incredible patterns when you get dialed in right.
And the next time that we talk, we're probably going to be getting prepped up for early ice season. So let's just touch on it briefly. At what point in time during your fall fishing are you starting to pay attention to spots that you might be checking early ice?
Well, I'm doing that year round. I mean, there's a lot of spots that are good in the summer, good in the spring. I mean, you're always looking and scouting and sniffing, but, as a rule of thumb, where you put fish to bed in the fall, really, that's like a no-brainer to check at early ice. People say, well, where should I start early ice? Well, where you caught them in the fall. That's it in a nutshell. And what's funny is that for whatever reason, some lakes just aren't having a good fall. I mean, and it changes from year to year, especially on small lakes, where, we've got all these small lakes in the Dakotas here that are, perch lakes / walleye lakes that are, say, less than 2,000 acres. There's your classic prairie dish bowl lakes, and some years the fishing's really good, some years it's not. And if you go out in some of these little lakes, especially, and it's really tough in the fall, the fish just aren't biting. Typically, it's not going to change at early ice. And vice versa, if it's really good in the fall, the fish are biting. There's lots of fish that are nice fish. Typically, that's a pretty good starting point come early ice. And so, in what can happen in the fall too is if you get really strong winds, that can really screw up stuff on a lot of different bodies of water. You even see it on Lake of the Woods, where say you get 7, 8 days in a row of say 30, 40 mile an hour winds, and the lake freezes up that way, and it's just all churned up and just the ice is all broken up and jagged, and you got dirty water and stuff. I mean, it makes the fall fishing tougher. Maybe you can't even get out there, and that just translates right over to early ice. Where it's a good fall, it's usually good early ice. And so yeah, we're always scouting and looking, and that's almost something you can take to the bank. Because if a lake's fishing well in the fall, that's where you want to be come winter.
I love it, man. Any closers, any updates of what's been going on lately?
We've got a lot of our open water stuff, scheduled or shot already. I mean, we had a great summer, a great year. We've got a lot of great episodes in the can. And I know we're just gonna chase stuff, and we're just gonna fish because just for the sake of fishing. That's why we do this. Is what we love to do. And so, I'm looking forward to getting up to Cabotogama, that Rainy Lake area, and getting up there this fall. I was really hoping to get back up to the Winnipeg River this fall, but obviously with the borders shut down, you're not going to be fishing in Canada this year, unfortunately. But yeah, and it just depends on how the weather shakes out. I mean, we're going to be fishing. Rainy River is another place that I hope to get to, and that's not very far from where I'm at. 3 hours and I'm there. And so yeah, we're just going to try to be opportunists too. Weather opens up, weather's favorable, and especially if you hear a few good bite patterns or good fishing, we're just going to try to fish until we can. So
perfect, man. Well, I know you're a busy guy, so I can let you back at it unless there's anything else that you want to throw in there before we head out.
Yeah, I can't think of nothing.
All right, man. Well, then I guess we'll talk to you.
You bet. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
And thank you all for following along on another episode of the podcast. If you're following on YouTube, Spotify, Stitcher, or Apple Podcasts, make sure to like, subscribe, share with your fishing friends, and head over to our social medias on Facebook and Instagram at Jason Mitchell Outdoors, where you can recommend a guest or a topic for an upcoming show.